Hey everyone, Settlers Lament here again, with some regulars or semi-regulars. This is, I guess, only your second time here, John Fisher. So you're not too regular, but you're regularish. And I once again have forgotten to mute myself. I mean, the YouTube video in the background. One day you think I'll stop doing that. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about distributism and capitalism and socialism. In particular, to sort of frame this discussion, there was a debate that got a fair bit of attention on a Catholic YouTube channel recently called Reason and Theology. They're a channel I'm familiar with. I've seen them before. I've watched their stuff. They're decent. It's a decent channel, and they had a debate on economics from a Catholic point of view and which economic system is most compatible with Catholicism. And of course, the three economic systems that they were debating was capitalism, socialism, and distributism. So I mean that's we're mostly going to be analyzing that debate, picking up on things from it that we think were interesting, and yeah. So I suppose the thing that I think is most interesting from this is how the distributist sort of framed distributism, and you being sort of the expert on this, I have no idea. Levy, I have no clue how to pronounce your first name.
There's an intense hatred for all of you. So I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert on it, but it's something that I'm very interested in, and it was part of my conversion process back when I converted to Catholicism in 2006, 2007, when I was in college. And it's something that I've picked up a lot more in the last couple of years after leaving Austrian economics and anarcho-capitalism in the gutter. And so, yeah, the distributist guy who spoke, Thomas Hackett, I think that he definitely has to be given the most sort of street cred out of the three, because he actually lives what he believes. So he actually, he has you can see in the video, he has a Catholic worker thing on the wall there. And I mean, the guy works with his hands. That's what he does. That's how he makes a living. He's a carpenter or something like that. So he definitely is someone who, is living out what he's talking about. And he seems to have, I think, come not a long way necessarily, but I think he has started from a much more Marxist left-wing kind of perspective. And I think he's, just looking at his writing and stuff over time, he seems to have progressed a little bit in terms of understanding this idea of basing our economics and our philosophy about commerce and all of that sort of thing around the church's teaching, rather than trying to shoehorn the church's teaching into a preconceived ideology, which is what the other two are certainly trying to do, it seems. So I don't know what else you wanted me to talk about, SL.
Well, I guess I guess on the sort of thing that kind of struck me from the debate is, like, I don't know much about economics. I say this on this channel a lot. So I have a pretty surface level understanding of distributism. But I don't know, what he was describing sounded much more radical than what I'm normally familiar with hearing people talk about. I suppose that's the main thing that sort of struck me from the debate.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. And I think the way to put it, or the way to understand what he's putting forward there, is that he's really coming at it from kind of a back to the land sort of perspective. And what I would say, just first of all, to kind of frame it, is that, of course, the church's teaching will allow for that. But I don't think that it's a necessary position to have. So he seems, like you said, a lot more radical about, just basically taking industrial society and throwing it in the trash. And maybe that's not exactly what he says, but that's a way of saying it very shortly. But he is he like I said, I think that that's a legitimate way of looking at it. But then I also would say that, once we're past Chester Belloc, once we're past the 20s and 30s, there are a lot of people writing in the tradition of Catholic social teaching, and I think giving us a more, I guess, a less radical perspective on it. So if you look at, for instance, the writing of Father Heinrich Pesch, who was a Jesuit priest and an economist, even he says in his book, Ethics in the National Economy, which was luckily for us translated into English, he even says, there's no need for us to give up the improvements that have come to us through what I guess you would call capitalism, or the expansion of markets, the technological progress that we have seen since the 1800s, and all of that. He's not saying we have to give that all up and sort of go back to the land and have 80% of the population farming and all that sort of thing. And his thing is there are concrete pronouncements from the church, from the popes, about what is just, and so we have to have, in some cases, policy, or we have to build civic institutions around those pronouncements from a moral perspective. And so again, that gives you leeway. So you can be like Father Pesch and say, hey, I don't mind refrigerators and air conditioning, and those aren't going to send me to hell. So why do we have to smash them all up like a bunch of commies?
So, I guess if is it possible to be a bit more concrete? What would it require? What would the Church of Social Teaching require?
Yeah, sorry, I have my 2-year-old on my lap here, but
based
Distributism at work.
Yeah, there you go. And actually, he's named after a Jesuit. His name is Xavier. So, anyway, what I would say is that you have a good example of this in Rerum Novarum, which is in many ways the foundational text of Catholic social teaching, and especially in the sense of looking at things like economics and technology and stuff like that. Not maybe necessarily about other important parts of Catholic social teaching like abortion and all of that. But so what does Pope Leo XIII tell us? Well, he says, that a man should be able to provide for his family. Not in the Distributism requires 12 things. I'm only a fourth of the way there then. Sorry. In this new world that we're living in, right? He's writing in the late 1800s. In this new world we're living in, where people work for wages, they don't have, everybody doesn't live on a farm anymore. So, well, since we work for a wage, then that wage. And I think Thomas Hackett does a great job of explaining this in the debate. He actually says that a wage is something that allows a man to feed his family and provide for them sort of in a way that is concurrent with normal living. So not bare subsistence, but in a way that is, that confers on that family dignity. Okay. So what Thomas does in this debate, and I think it's very interesting, and I'm not a philosophizer, but I would say it's an interesting argument that a wage isn't just the price of labor, right, or the price of a specific type of labor. That it's not an economic category, that it actually is something that allows someone to provide for their family. So I think that's an interesting way to go about it. And maybe that's a fruitful way of arguing. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I haven't, the debate only happened earlier this week or last week or something. So I haven't really had time to, dig in and figure that out. But I really appreciated what he said there.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's one thing that that sort of also struck me quite a bit from the debate was was Trent Horn in particular really just shirked off the concept of a just wage. And he just gave the sort of standard libertarian arguments of like, what really is a wage? A wage is just determined by the market. He didn't really try and deal with it in a theological sense. He didn't say like, well,
and even then, he's ignoring the reality of other components of distributism that are sort of non-negotiables. The just price. Well, the just wage is just in Father Pesch's framing, the just wage is just a special case of the just price. And the just price applies specifically to necessities, not to everything. So Trent Horn sort of, flippantly talking about, people needing his podcast or something. Well, we have to submit to the authority of the state when it is exercising its legitimate authority in this case, right? The state is empowered with the responsibility and has the competence to determine what things should be under a just wage mandate. And thus, Trent's flippant criticism doesn't even really hold any water. There are other things too. We might say that within the sort of and I'm not, I don't really like the term distributism. I'm not a huge fan of it because I think in most people's mind who understand it or know anything about it, they instantly go to Chester Belloc and they instantly go back to the land stuff. And I'm much more interested in using a term like solidarism, which is the system that Father Pesch is saying that we should be pushing forward. So there are other components, a ban on usury, which is defined as the charging of interest on a loan. So that would be a necessary part of justice. In fact, usury is a sin against nature. It's a sin that cries out to God for vengeance. It's making something that is inert into something productive. So, there's a lot of things you would have to put into that list, but it doesn't include, destroying all of the machinery.
So sorry to be like a bit slow, but like what is a just wage? Like, how is that determined?
Yeah. So just conceptually, you would say that again, the wage is determined by, it would have to be sufficient for a man to provide for his family in a fashion that confers dignity on them. So again, not bare subsistence, and further, actually, Chesterton makes a big point about this a lot in his writing, is that the wage would also is also not sufficient unless it allows the family to own property and own productive property. And so today, what does that look like? I mean, does that look like owning was it 3 acres and a cow, right? I mean, we don't take care of our own subsistence anymore. And so, in that way, we go to the market for these things. And so, but the point would be that the wage should be sufficient for those things, for a man to provide for his family, to own a home, to own his, whatever necessary means of transportation that were common in his area, for him to have some kind of capital-based income. Now, maybe you could argue that a mutual fund retirement account is sufficient for that. I'm not, again, these particulars are up to the state to decide, and we can start talking about integralism if you want, but those are things for the state with the appropriate moral counsel, right? I.e. the bishop and the Pope, perhaps, depending on what level of government we're talking about. It's incumbent on them to decide these specifics. So again, Thomas says, Thomas Hackett in the debate says, a just wage is this. I'm saying a just wage, or he says a wage is this. I'm saying a just wage is this. Thing that provides for a family. And of course, you get some of the common, capitalist Catholic type responses would be, oh, well, what if somebody, they're just mowing my yard? Do I own do I have to pay him $80,000 a year? Well, no, that's, to the extent that that's a full-time business, then, of course that person should charge a rate that allows him to have that type of living that makes his family content. But at the same time, again, this is a capital-based kind of thing, right? This is a business, so there's some risk to it. And then we start talking about safety nets and things like that. But when we're talking about a wage where someone is an employee, right? If somebody's mowing your lawn or shoveling your snow or whatever, that person is not your employee. That person is a contractor for you. So it's a completely different. It's completely irrelevant. If we're talking about somebody, the flipping burgers thing, the minimum wage and all of this, again, is a part-time worker, working adequately to provide for a family? I would say no. If you're only working 20 hours a week, these days in our society, that's not enough work to expect to have a decent living for your family. And so you need to buck up and work some more. Preferably at the same place. And this gets to the idea that, a higher minimum wage isn't going to fix anything, because the minimum wage only applies to a certain classes of workers. And to the extent that it's effective in driving wages up, it's also going to kill a lot of businesses and kick a lot of people off of the ladder who are trying to build skills and be able to establish a family.
So I mean that makes sense. So I guess the response, sort of in brief, to what Trent Horn was saying, is a just price, is a just wage. It is an objective question. It's not just like some ethereal thing that is set by some bureaucrat. It's an objective question of what does it take for a family to what does it take for a man to provide for his family. Sufficient to promote their dignity. So it's not just like some random price that someone thinks is appropriate.
Right.
But 21, you're the former libertarian. Do you have anything to say to destroy the distributism with facts and logic?
I wasn't a libertarian. I went beyond that. I was an ANCAP that was based, as in, like radical liberation, where he has like his own little family farm. It's like he's like the patriarch and he like owns it all, like that. That's based ANCAPistan. But I don't know why I started learning about this stuff, paying attention to stuff, because every time I hear the mainstream discussion back and forth on the economic topic, it gives me a splitting giant headache, worse than any possible political discussion, because the modern framing in political language that we have is basically broken, right? It's just nonsensical. And I feel it's the same way with this economic stuff. I still think during that whole debate, they were talking past each other. And I see in the chat, people are starting to bring this up, where people will frame practical questions, like the kind of questions that Trent Horn was giving, as, oh, why are you being libertarian? Why are you being a capitalist? But what I'm thinking of is the consideration that the possibility that economics, it's not a hard science, but it is like, there is some study to it. And I think there's some objectivity about noticing patterns in how trade markets, people managing scarce resources, how that works. I think we have enough settled knowledge around that to the point where you can describe it. You can describe the mechanics of it, but not be talking about like the moral ideology, because it's so bad, because Milton Friedman spent 40 years, giving lectures combining how like free markets function, and then pasting on very slyly his ideology of freedom on top of that. So that's kind of annoying, and it makes things confusing. I think the whole debate was them talking past each other, because Trent Horn was asking like these practical questions about, it's like, okay, well, how would that work, and what's the mechanism, and what's the exact, like you were just covering the exact just price or just wage or whatever. And they were talking about ideals and moral ends in response. So I kind of didn't enjoy that. But I will say this, in terms of the how the language is completely broken. Capitalism versus socialism, I think that's an intellectual entrapment that we're in the same way that like freedom versus equality is in the modern age. I mean, capitalism, as it's meant, it's supposed to mean, is like a free market and capital, when that's never existed in human history, basically. And okay, capital itself is usually put into the form of currency, which is managed by a state, and sometimes they can do stuff to it that doesn't really make it out of command from the state. So there's a kind of confusion around that. But yeah, I think my impression was Trent Horn didn't have many serious ideals, but he was asking practical questions about how things would actually function in reality. And then the distributist and the socialist spoke about things in terms of ideals, but didn't really parse out the actual application of it in a way that's like concrete for me.
If I can just jump in real quick on that. So I think one of the challenges we have is we treat economics as if it is a hard science and as if markets have inherent properties, but they don't. They have the properties of markets are contingent on the institutions beneath them, and even liberal capitalist economists have been saying this for decades. I mean, Douglas North was huge in the whole idea of institutional contingency. Ronald Coase, and so even in the sort of relatively narrow sense in which they were examining the effect of these underlying institutions on the markets themselves. I just, whenever I hear somebody say like, well, that doesn't go with the law of supply and demand. And it's like, oh my gosh, come on, man. So I'm not saying that that's what you're saying, but I think that is a big mistake that we make. And that even though even the critiques that Ronald Coase or Douglas North made can be taken even farther. And I think that's what was so great about Father Bernard Dempsey, Father Heinrich Pesch, Rupert J. Ederer, these economists from the last century that took the study of economics seriously and could respond to those problems that Horn had, but at the same time understood the notion that the way markets operate is contingent on something more fundamental. And I would also say,
but what I want to happen is, because I completely agree, the normies, the normal economists, framing it only as hard science. I mean, that's what they do with all these fields of study, especially the quote unquote social sciences, is they frame it as a hard science, and then they put in ideology or other ideals into it and pretend that that's objective reality.
Evidence-based policy.
Evidence-based public policy from the School of Harvard. Yeah, exactly.
Cato Institute.
Right.
But I think there's a descriptive element and a prescriptive element to economics, and we never fully separate that in some way, in my opinion. I agree that, the fundamental institutions of society will transform how the market actually functions. I mean, the stock market, the regular market that we have now in America is dependent on what the Federal Reserve System and the central banking system does with the very money that you exchange assets and commodities for. So, yeah, I would agree with that.
May I just point out one thing about the dialogue between Mena and Horn, where they both levied the same objection towards Hackett about how doesn't distributism just fall into either, a leftist socialist economic viewpoint, or, just a kind of libertarian-esque capitalist going back to the land. You have your own individual farmland and stuff to take care of. I think it is partly because we're caught in this post-Enlightenment dichotomy of how are we going to spread the wealth? Are we going to centralize it and just distribute it from there? Or are we just going to let individuals decide and distribute it there, and everyone can just make all these voluntary exchanges? Whereas I think the kind of economic policy we all want to have is our economy following the dictates and the moral dictates of the church? Are we following our moral compass when it comes to usury? Are we following our moral compass when it comes to providing people a living wage? Are we meeting these basic outcomes? And one of the greatest things you could actually say, if I was in Hackett's position, was, how are you not just taking up the stuff you like about my distributive philosophy, which has a mentality that comes way before the Enlightenment, and just picking up the ones or the specific things you like. One could easily say, for example, about socialism is it tries to impose a kind of morality that distributivists like to seek, but on the other hand, we're actually the ones saying it goes too far because it's trying to abolish the goods that we're trying to preserve. Like, what good is communism if it abolishes the family in the meantime? And what good is capitalism if it just, subjects the family to the passions? I think those are the questions we really need to look for, and not get caught up in this dichotomy that capitalists and socialists are trying to get us on.
There we go. That's a good the outer breaking the frame. It's very based. But
well, so can I respond to 21st and John both? So
Okay.
reaction. So you're saying that that there is in economics we call it the positive versus normative distinction, right? So there's this component of social science that is value free in a sense, right? Or it's just the nuts and bolts versus the normative, the policy making decisions and the I guess economics sort of welfare economics components. And I think the issue is that it's sort of like a mystery kind of thing because I don't think you can ever actually separate them conceptually completely. Partly because, I think to some extent this positive versus normative distinction rests on a liberal frame because it assumes that you can just look at human beings and their activity purely from a nuts and bolts perspective and not include the morality piece. I don't think that's the case, number one. And number two, I think that what happens is it allows you to just kind of sneak in whatever morality you want, number one. Plus, number two, it doesn't allow you to be base and red pilled and, burn the books that you need to burn or whatever, right? I mean, it doesn't allow
we'll do that. We'll do that, and we'll do crushing luxury taxes on all the vices and all that base stuff.
Right. But, yeah.
But what I want to ask is okay, are the physical resources in the world scarce that we have on Earth?
Sure.
Yes. And do we have infinite time and space and means to allocate them? No. So there's some basic thing there. So humans are always having to efficiently manage their time and efficiently manage those resources. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying it's not like it's not like I want to reject just wage. I think right. Standard of having a basic living standard of what people are provided is awesome and everything. It's just every time that Trent asked those kinds of practical questions, I feel like they hand waved it away and never got down to it.
Well, because they don't understand economics, right? I mean,
that's what I was worried about. It was so annoying.
The two things you said, and I don't mean to blast him or anything, but I mean that's just legit, and not that Trent Horn does either. I mean, all he understands is just what the Bush School at Catholic University of America and his co-author on his book told him. So he doesn't understand it either. He's an ethicist and a debater. He doesn't study economics. So, it's easy for him to just ask questions. And so when I'm agreeing with you on those two basic facts about the world, I mean, all that does is just give you economics, right? It gives you a field of study about scarce resources and, that sort of thing. It doesn't give you any moral framework. So I'm with you there. I think the problem is that the capitalist people take that way too far. They say, okay, because we have scarcity, therefore all these other things. And I think that's what you're railing against too. So I wish that more of them would take your position.
Can I also just bring up one other thing, and it's probably the strength of the distributivist position. It could also take what's generally good about the mechanisms of both systems, so long as it doesn't go to a certain extreme, and reutilize them. Mm-hmm. So, for example, one capitalist that I really like reading is Brian Kaplan, even though I disagree with him on quite a bit. I thought his analysis of modern education systems was pretty spot on. And I do agree with him that we should at least abolish funding to public universities. And I also like
Seize the endowments.
seize the endowments. But then again, there are also certain things I like about certain socialist economists. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who, aside from being an author, was also a socialist economist. She actually pointed out that, hey, maybe women who work at home deserve a wage themselves. And you know what? As a
Ooh.
no, I like that idea. It incentivizes the nuclear family, and it incentivizes women to stay home, raise the children. It also incentivizes the average family
You know, it
to have
incentivized the
one
nuclear family banning divorce.
There
that
you go.
too. We could do both. Why not?
No fault divorce. Get rid of it.
Get rid
Well,
of it.
look,
But
Get
paying
rid of
women
all
is
divorce.
just- paying women to stay at home is just literally they created a problem and then they solve it by adding a new thing, commodifying it in a way that it wasn't meant to be commodified.
Well, okay, so let's just slightly reframe it then. Instead of framing it as a pay the woman, why don't you just have the man's wage adjustable based on the number of dependents he has?
That too.
Problem solved. So I think I want to go back to what you were saying before, John. Is that I think one of the real problems we have, and I talked about this on my show several weeks ago. The whole idea that Jesus was a socialist and all this nonsense. Here's the problem, and you saw this with Mena for sure. He's basically, the way he gets to his problem with Hackett's argument is he says, well, how is it that your distributist thing doesn't just devolve into one or the other? And it's like, well, okay, that says a lot more about you, Mena, than anything else, because it says that you have this dichotomous thinking. And in fact, what you see, from him saying Dorothy Day is a socialist and all this other stuff is he just thinks that anything that's not capitalism is socialism, right? And so that gives him free reign to disavow certain things that are convenient to him in the specific debate that he's in, and also to claim that the only thing that he can be on the hook for is his policy ideals, right? So I would never want someone to be I would never want to be only on the hook for my own policy ideals. I would need to be, I think it'd be fair for me to be on the hook for the results. But I think the challenge here is, Mena would say that capitalism is not just a set of policies, it's an ideology, right? And I think Trent Horn would say the same thing about socialism. And I would just simply say they're both right. Socialism is not a set of policies. If someone tells me they're a socialist economist, then I would just ask them, why they're telling me that they're a philosopher, right? It's a category error. Just because you want, women to be paid or men's pay to be adjusted on their house size or whatever, that doesn't make you a socialist. It simply identifies you with a policy. And because we have this liberal frame, we have this liberal dichotomy, is that, everything that this group of people are pushing for is socialism, and everything that this group of people over here, that group of people, the capitalists, is pushing for, that's capitalism. No. They are simply policies. It's like a hammer. A hammer doesn't have a philosophy. A hammer just does certain things. And a wrench is not a good hammer, and a hammer is not a good wrench. The philosophy underneath it is completely different than the policies themselves.
Yeah, it all goes back to that one meme. What is it? Socialism is when the government does stuff, and the more it does, the more socialister it is.
That's Richard Wolff. He said it in a way that's amazing.
He did, but it does go to show, like, this kind of dichotomous thinking. Oh, is it the market doing it? Then it's capitalism. Is it the state or some kind of central body, or body politic? Well, it's socialism. I mean, yeah, I agree with what Levi is saying. These are specific policies, specific ideas, and the moral bounds you put it comes first. Actually, and that's another thing. Post-Enlightenment thinking is, okay, your ideology, it flows from materialism. The way you organize your economic material, that's how you're going to think about the world. Whereas the Catholic understanding is, no, the idea comes first, and how the economy sorts itself out comes second. If you have the right idea, the right moral philosophy, what you do is going to determine how the economy is run, how it's going to come about. Whereas the post-Enlightenment philosophy is, no, we're all, in a sense, deterministic on the economy, and how the economy is formed is going to be the full determinative totality of how we think about it.
Neoliberalism at work, my man. That's how
Exactly.
it is. And
that's the Marxist way of thinking too. Like Marx was all about the materialist dialectic.
Right. It's like the Marxists are like, we're going to BTFO and own the capitalists and like win the argument, when they just engage the same framing, and it's just all neoliberalism. But I just wanted to address one thing. I hopefully we can all agree with it, that in the debate, what all the quote unquote non-capitalist sides did is, unfortunately, they used capitalism in the left-wing magical word way it is used, in that anything in the status quo that they don't like is capitalist. And first of all, I think they demonstrated that they don't really understand the fundamentals of how the current system works and how it's actually affecting people, and they only care about the surface level symptomatic things and how to wave those away. And then second of all, they don't pay attention to just the matter of fact that, are we just going to label everything capitalist? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you're taking cradle to adolescence, put into a socialized institution where you're taught communist propaganda. I guess, when you come out and you're not even worth $10 minimum wage, that's capitalism, right? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think one way to talk about that too is that the forerunners of the capitalist ideology or whatever, right? So you talk about like Adam Smith or something. In his time, the social bonds were much tighter. People actually had communities, right? People were actually integrated into some kind of a social life, and that has been so eroded. Check out Charles Murray's work, or just read Bowling Alone, like a 20-year-old book. We're so atomized at this point that again, it's not necessarily the set of policies that these two things like, or even really the ideologies themselves, but it's just this eroded society that that causes a lot of the problems, and then they just sort of point at each other like the two Spider-Man thing.
Preach, brother. I mean, that's right on. I mean, I think the problem is that we're in a historically unique moment, and by historical moment, I mean last 2.5 centuries, where capital wasn't fully restrained by the state, and it ran loose. And if you guys know about Nick Land, his point is that capital used to have these restrictions where it could not be allocated anywhere, it could not be globalized, etc., all that stuff. So now we have the opportunity under neoliberalism to allocate capital wherever, as in, putting investment into Chinese companies instead of American companies, because it's just more efficient, bro. And just investing in new technologies, and just this continuous creative destruction mechanism that just makes everything more efficient in terms of feeding consumption and increasing efficiency, like a feedback loop. And basically, Nick Land's famous quote about it is that capitalism or neoliberalism in this form is an AI from the future that takes away our humanity. So like Levi Russell said, everything is commodified, everything is optimized for efficiency, and it's just about fulfilling people's base material desires for consuming goods and services. And it's kind of hard to deal with how we're going to avoid that. Because the problem that we have right now is that neoliberalism wins in terms of creating efficient, wealthy countries, and those countries dominate the world. I mean, that's why the Anglosphere is the Anglosphere. And we could go on about how we could have this based agrarian revolt against the modern world, distributed ownership of farms and stuff. But we have to be able to compete with that in the modern world.
Another point is that even when the point about free trade is made, usually the benefits aren't really well distributed, pardon the pun. Usually any benefits there are to putting labor overseas, we don't really see that well distributed here. Okay, let's say someone in China can make a car cheaper than, I don't know, than I can, living in my own city, and I lose my job. Okay, what are the benefits that come to the economy from that? And how am I benefiting at all? Am I supposed to look for work somewhere else in another part of the country, leave all I have? And if I am supposed to sacrifice to that extent, then why do you get to dictate that the benefit in that exchange was worth it when I'm the one who has to give up a lot, which I would consider valuable, even if it's not broken down into GDP?
Right. Okay. Yeah. This is a perfect question. First of all, there is no "quote unquote" economy that benefits it. It's just everybody else benefits slightly more, and then you benefit less if you value like just having your job and not getting fired from it. So the problem here is that neoliberalism, when it comes down to it, is just allowing for the most efficient allocation of capital in order to fill the collective preferences of all the people in the system. Now, their preferences, because of the current zeitgeist, is just the most efficient consumption of goods and services. So, their cars the cars that they drive are going to be slightly cheaper so that they can consume somewhere else a bit more, Fisher. And, if that's why it's not, I don't really view it as the economy as some kind of like moral thing. It's just the aggregated preferences of all these people acting in it. And if their preferences are bad in some way, if they prefer opioids, if they prefer to destroy society, that's what's going to happen. That's the whole problem, is that it's engaging in the democratic spirit. Just because many economic actors prefer things to be a certain price and for things to be put certain places, for people to work at certain places, doesn't mean it's necessarily moral to do so.
And that was an interesting part about this whole debate, that because Trent Horn was just constantly saying, like, well, what if people don't want to do this? And it's like, well, tough. It's like, what if people what if people want to overdose on drugs all the time and commit suicide? Well, it's okay to stop them. Like, I mean, this is Tucker Carlson. You could get this from just watching Tucker Carlson every night. Some things just shouldn't be allowed. And sometimes those things are couched in terms of preferences and, economics or whatever. But I mean, go look at the Austrian school people. Go look at like Walter Block, right? Defending the undefendable or something like that, and he's like, oh, pimps are just, they're just middlemen or, whatever. It's like you can couch anything in terms of, it's just my preferences or, but that doesn't make it okay. And so I just think it was funny that, Trent Horn's sort of like giving away the whole store there, where he's like, we should let capitalism, run free because, people just want to do certain things and we should let them. It's like, come on, dude. Like, where's your moral theology?
Oh, thank goodness I don't watch Tucker Carlson.
Well, you should.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, okay, so that was one of the so of course they have the socialism versus capitalism frame that they go into, but I think like all of us, including them, still suffer from this problem where it's within the democratic frame, the democratic spirit. in that everyone should have their say, everyone should be able to give their revealed preferences in the market. And I think they underestimate the effect of the formation of the government structure itself in society and how it affects the economy. Because when you have a democratic market like that, of course you'd want to liberalize everything because it reflects the liberalized preferences of people in politics. But when you have a monarchy or something else, it could be more managed, or it could be something that doesn't have as distributed ownership, because society's coming together around this human pyramid of competence and and divine right. So that was one of the problems. I'd say there's like four things that everyone presumes, and that's the problem. It's the democratic spirit, as I said, it's individual autonomy, it's progress, and it's like the Lockean conception of ownership. I think those four things is what causes me to have like a dull pain in the back of my head for hours and hours.
Well, and that was one of the interesting things that Mena kept talking about is, he gets on this kick about democracy and, well, we have to have the government do all of these certain specific things because they're accountable to the people. That's like, dude,
yeah,
what dream are you living in?
Yeah. That left quote unquote Cath, I just ignored him.
Yeah.
Trent is lucky in one regard. He got to debate before this whole recent GameStop issue, which I think I think to be fair, nobody is giving any quarter to the hedge fund managers. So I think his opponents and interlocutors, that is, would have had a field day. Oh, by the way, there was actually a really superb tweet I wanted to share. I don't know. Oh, right. It was by Father Brendan LaRoche. He said, "There is no objective living wage. Work is worth what people will accept being paid to do." Then he says, "There is an objective value to GameStop stocks, and people being willing to pay more than this distorts that." And then he writes, "People who say this are the same people."
Yeah.
I'm not
Sad.
that people. That stuff was stupid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I guess.
Wait. Can we get to GameStop later? Oh my gosh.
Oh,
No.
I mean,
Well,
I suppose on that topic briefly, Charlemagne did send in a super chat for $2. What is the just price of a GameStop stock?
Yeah, so I mean, this gets actually. I mean, this is a point that Trent Horn sort of tried to make tongue in cheek, right? That well, he thinks his business is a necessity and therefore has a just price. I think this is one of the challenges we have is that when we're talking about a just price, if you read, for instance, Father Bernard Dempsey and some of these other guys on this stuff. And by the way, if anybody wants like a big reading list with a bunch of papers, like academic papers and stuff that they want to read, if they're interested in reading this stuff, please hit me up. Just I guess, I don't know, you got my contact info somewhere in the description, right? Because I found a bunch of great stuff.
I think I have your Twitter and your podcast link.
Yeah. So like if you're,
do you have like a reading list on the Leon Institute or whatever?
Yeah. So the Leonine Institute has a reading list of books, but I guess what I'm talking about is a list of like journal articles and stuff. So, which is really the way that, all of the academia, that's the way academia talks to each other now. It's not in books. So the books are like popular press type stuff. Whereas I'm talking about something else. It's not a bunch of math and all that kind of nonsense. It's good stuff. But look, the just price applies to things that are, they're consumer goods. So they may be durable consumer goods. Like maybe you think that, to live a dignified life, everybody needs to have a refrigerator, right? So in that sense, Charlemagne, you would need to have some way of determining a just price for a basic refrigerator. Okay. And that could be determined, that could be figured out. But a lot of times we're also talking about things that are consumed in their use. In other words, non-durable goods, non-durable consumer goods, things like food. So, that would also be something where we would, come up with
Which
some kind of
foods?
range around, specific
Lobster?
foods and all of that, right? I mean, you're going to have all these specifics, and yes, Trent Horn, we're going to let the government figure it out. Yes, you can cry about it all you want, but we're going to let the government figure it out. Boo-hoo. But on something like the value of a business, right? I mean, the concept of this, I think can't really be that old. I mean, sure, since we've had double entry accounting, in theory, we've had the concept of a balance sheet. And so you could add up, sort of the original purchase price of all of the, the assets that the business owns. But then, of course, with the vicissitudes of the market and competition and things like this, the price of those assets, the value of those assets might fluctuate over time, and therefore the value of the business from an asset perspective would fluctuate. But we also have in finance, of course, we use growth rates of cash flows to determine the value of the business. Okay, so there isn't and I know this is probably flippant, right, based on just the whole GameStop thing, but I guess to give a really ridiculously overanalyzed answer, I don't think there is one. There's a way we try to determine these things, and I just sort of love the Joker mentality of just driving the price up for funsies. But at some point, I mean, having your own stock over, shorted like 150% of the stock in short positions somehow with synthetic shorts or whatever they had. Is that necessarily an accurate way of determining the value of GameStop? I don't know.
I'm glad you don't presume to know what the value of Tesla was, because then almost the entire financial elite got it wrong for 5 years. And I'm glad that people haven't objectively determined the value of Bitcoin, because the entire financial elite for 10 years got it completely wrong, and we proved them wrong. So
Tesla is supported by idiotic enviro-commie watermelon policies, and their joy for blowing the arms off of small children in third world countries for their batteries will put them in hell.
Yeah, whatever. Elon Musk is based. Whatever.
No, he's not. He's a lunatic, and he's I
didn't say he wasn't a lunatic.
Communist. He's a
He's
communist.
not a lunatic, and he's not a commie. He's like a Reddit tier libertarian or whatever.
Yeah, but it's right. Okay, well, so how many children has he maimed with his lithium-ion batteries? I mean, this guy should be in prison.
Oh my gosh, sounds like a shallow understanding, in my opinion. But
okay, all right. Well, whatever we could say about Elon Musk.
I think the important question is: did those children consent to having their arms?
Okay, but that's hilarious. But to go back to Trent Horn's point about how are we going to figure out the living wage and this question that keeps coming up, and all the practical considerations that he tries to bring up. At the end of the day, if his inference is I don't have one yet, or I'm not educated on one yet, therefore we should get rid of these alternative systems, that's a textbook argument from ignorance. Let's take this back like 400 years ago. You could ask the guy who's promoting democracy, and I'm pretty sure a 21st century reaction might question him on a little more than this, but you could ask him, okay, let's say somebody is elected to office and they don't want to hand over the power of their office to their successor. How are you going to utilize a peaceful transference of power? Because isn't this just going to cause like a major civil conflict? Now, granted, it did happen a bit recently, but I'm not going to touch on that one too much. The point is, this was actually a huge issue that people who were pushing for democracy had to come up with an answer to. And if they didn't have an answer, was it like, oh, well, we can't really do this anymore? No, sometimes you just don't know exactly how it's going to work. It doesn't mean there isn't a way of figuring this out, or there isn't some kind of prospect, but it is a very fallacious thing to say, because it has not been figured out yet. Therefore, it will never be figured out yet. So, yeah, that's not really going to help him.
Yeah, and it seems like, I mean, just with any of the sort of capitalist stuff, it's like we you know, there's only two categories, right? There's you know, everyone's preferences and opinions and hard facts, and that's it. Like, you know, so anything that's not a hard fact in the mind of the capitalist must just be an individual preference and forget about the family. And I think that was actually, you know, the family was a really good kind of yardstick for this. And because you really didn't see, I mean, you really saw sort of the emptiness of both ideologies, capitalism and socialism, when it came to giving a crap about the family.
Right. So my question is, how do we effectively compete with neoliberalism into having a relatively efficient system without, atomizing, individualizing, commodifying everything in the world, including the family and all those traditional bonds? Because I don't see how I can solve that problem.
Maybe I'm not sufficiently red-pilled enough in this, but one suggestion is do the best you can to work within the system, push for policies that support the family, even if it's incremental, and also help push for local businesses. So co-ops, this is something Levi has repeated, and also work within your local boundaries to help establish your church. Because
no, I'm talking about on the global stage. Globalization is, in the word, a global event, and that's because neoliberalism is basically the paradigm in the entire world, including China, including Southeast Asia, including the Middle East. All these places are going off of free trade, absolute efficiency, commodify everything, and then they make a bunch of wealth out of that. And we don't have a way of competing against that without having a midway position, basically.
So I guess I would disagree that we, whatever you mean by that we don't have sort of a leg up on any of this. So look, I mean,
how do you outcompete neoliberalism in terms of producing wealth and having more efficient production of stuff?
Yeah, no,
I'm praying the rosary.
Yeah, so okay, so yeah, that's a start. I mean, here's the thing, right? Here's where subsidiarity kind of comes back to bite you in the ass, in a sense that it sort of quells your pride. Look, I'm just some guy, right? And I think the rest of the three of you would agree that you're also some guy, right? But there are people who are not some guy, right? There's Donald Trump. There's Pope Francis.
Yeah. One day I'll not be some guy, hopefully.
Yeah. So right. So here's the thing, right? I mean, in our own sphere, we can do what we should do what we can to change the trajectory of the future. Now, I mean, it's sort of like the old thing, strong men make good times make weak men make hard times make strong men. So, we're just in part of that cycle. If there's a cycle, I don't know, if that's a legitimate way of looking at it, we're just in a really crummy part of that. And so we just simply have to do what we can and allow the people who are in these seats of power to influence things as best they can, right? We had 4 years of Trump, and I mean, heck, I don't know about you guys, but I did a few good things over the last 4 years when I didn't have to worry about, blow Jiden, nuking my family from orbit. So, I mean, and there are things that he pushed and things that he tried to do that improved the trajectory of things, hopefully for a while, right? I mean, butterfly effect or whatever. But Pope Francis as well. I mean, he's what was it? There was some kind of thing where, and everybody was complaining because he was getting in on some group to influence like MasterCard and Visa, and then like right after that, they like cut off payments to these porn companies because the human trafficking issues and stuff. Look, I mean, let them do it. Don't complain when the Pope talks about the need to influence these massive multinational institutions. I mean, that's what he is there for. And there are probably things he knows that you and I don't. And so, he's doing what he can. And, maybe he's corrupt, maybe he's evil or whatever. Okay, maybe, but there's certainly nothing you and I are ever going to do about that. So, like Settlers said, pray the rosary and do the best that you can. And there's nothing saying you can't build, right? I mean, simple things themselves help, and you can see that, heck with this GameStop thing, right? I mean, who are these people? I mean, initially it was just a bunch of, it was just a meme or whatever, but then I'm pretty sure you got some pretty heavy hitters jumping in on that, to push that up. But so,
what economics, sorry.
No, I just think like, and even, I think even with the Leonine Institute, with our director and the stuff that we're doing to put good information out there and to make these points and stuff, we're even starting to attract some the attention of people with influence. And so, it's sort of like success breeds, gets you attention, I guess.
Another thing to keep in mind just from studying history is think of yourself as being part of the early Christian church. There you had to ask yourself, okay, all right, our Lord and Savior ascended into heaven. He is up there, ascended. Right now we're dealing with persecution. We're dealing with the Roman Empire. This is a global institution. They have vast amounts of power. And mind you, this is at a time when you didn't really have like a good overview of the world and the extent of it. Like you were probably of the opinion that they did conquer and hold control of most of the known worlds, or most of the actual world. And at this time, a lot of Christians resorted to this very apocalyptic thinking that the only way to overcome it was for Jesus to just descend down, destroy it, and bring about the church on earth. And this was actually called millenarianism, and it was actually condemned. Saint Irenaeus actually held to it, but I digress. The point is, like at that time, there was no way of thinking this institution would have been overcome unless by an actual visible miracle of God just manifesting itself, rather than an act of slow providential decline of the empire, which eventually did happen. And eventually you saw the ascension of the church. Like you never really know how history plays out. And part of one of the hugest issues about the liberal narrative is it gets you to believe in this idea that this is really the end of history. Nothing major is going to come after this. And I think it's very narcissistic. I think that there is going to be an end to whatever we're seeing right now, either naturally or divine. And it's just going to progress to something else. And we're going to have to deal with that later on. History marches forward. It's not the end here. Liberalism, it might see itself, and many of its elites might see it as having this great longevity to just withstand everything else that's coming forth. But in all honesty, if we look at every other major empire and civilization that's come before it, we know that this is more likely to be hubris than actual scientific thinking, which is what we're trying to be convinced of.
Agreed. So what is the economic system that a major society could adopt that is competitive with all the neoliberal countries in terms of wealth production and efficiency of production without being completely degenerate?
I don't think it has to be competitive. I think it has to be stable. I think even if
all the other countries and empires could not compete with the Anglosphere, and the Anglosphere took over. The Soviet Union lost because it was more inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so
Leeway?
I have an answer to that. So I mean, I think number one, what you have to have is you have to have a Well, okay. First of all, it's not the case that economic policies are always the the driver of this stuff. So I mean, you can always there's always the Switzerland option, right? I mean, or whatever, where you just stay out of stuff, right?
Well, no, Switzerland is a nice exception, is because it would be such a pain in the butt to mess with them in the first place, and then they're inside a larger block of nations that have a big alliance. So there's not really a point of going after them.
Okay.
The problem is that we have. I mean, this is how history works. There's large empires in the world, and some of them are able to outcompete and survive, and some of them don't. And how do we make sure ours would survive against neoliberal countries?
Right. So, and again, it's not necessarily so. Perhaps there is a way to make yourself unattractive, I guess. Right. So, so I think one of the preconditions for all of this is understanding that you might just fail, and that you should have a healthy attachment to your family and your nation and all of that, but you should also have adequate poverty of spirit with regard to these things, just like anything else, that's here in the physical world with us. But I think part of the problem is that there are things that we can do in a policy sense that can rebuild community and all of that. So that's possible, or that's a precondition, I think, of the policy part. It's like you have to have adequate, military might or whatever, given the wealth that you own, right? And then you also have to have the cojones to just simply shut yourself off if that's what you need to do. So, like, if you need to close your trade routes, or most of them, or whatever, right? If that's one of the threats you're facing, is sort of an economic, U.S. versus China, right? At least, obviously, China's doing a lot of other things, but when it comes to the sort of trade war with China, you have to be able to just simply say, no, we're going to fight a trade war. That's something that Trump did, and that's something that Biden's not interested in doing. And it's just the way it is, and it has nothing to do with the financial. In other words, the financial resources are orthogonal. I mean, the financial resources make this the fight, but if we had fewer financial resources, the fight would be U.S. versus Mexico, right? It would just be a different foe. But the underlying, what you need is the solidarity within the country to say, yes, we're going to fight this trade war, even if it costs us, real wages, right? Or whatever the argument is against it. So part of it is that, you talk about the success of various empires, et cetera. Well, part of the success of those things was their ability to spread Christianity. So, maybe, spreading liberalism and all of that stuff was bad, but, imagine if we didn't have Christianity in these places. I mean, is that a trade-off you want to make? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, the primary thing is, like, if I was optimizing a system for efficiency, then I would try and free up the capital as much as possible. But if I was trying to optimize for virtue and accountability, it would just be like extremely low standard of living, like neo-feudalist agrarianism. But, right. I'd prefer to have an empire that lasts a couple centuries and helps, like, save a few billion souls along the way. It's just a matter of, like, which route are you going to go?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're ever going to get the ideal, right? I don't think we're going to get to that point, but I think, to an extent, you have to use what you have. I mean, you're talking about efficiency and, wealth and stuff like that. Okay, sure. I don't have a problem with the U.S. being wealthy and the policies that will get the U.S. to that point. You're sitting here complaining about China and you're complaining about neoliberalism and all of this. Okay, well, you can't have both. If you want, if you want the,
I'm against wealth.
Okay, well, then there's no argument with you, right?
I'm sorry, I'm messing with you a little bit. But I think the point comes down,
like you're saying you can't have power without wealth, and then you're saying you want power but no wealth. Well, which is it?
Yeah, I'm just being an edgy gamer. You kind of do need wealth in order to have power, and the fundamental problem is that these neoliberal societies are really, really good at pumping out wealth. So I think it's just basically has almost been a selection pressure for the last few centuries in that the most wealthy and efficient societies would win out. Modern example would be the US versus the Soviet Union. So I think the future for illiberal societies and any illiberal institutions is something that a guy named Despot what's his name? Despot Romanicus said, where basically all the effective illiberal institutions would be extractive. They'd be extracting wealth and power from a system almost parasitically, and that's how they'd survive in the face of techno-capitalism, if they extract from it, and just did that forever.
Well, one of the things you also have to keep in mind is they're really good at accumulating wealth, but at what cost? What profiteth a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? In the sense that, okay, yeah, they're getting wealth, but they're losing virtue. And is an economy, nay, is a state where people are growing more and more selfish and less virtuous, is that ever going to be a state that lasts? And mind you, since even when America was going mano a mano with the Soviet Union, at the very least, most of that time, they still held on to a lot of their very religious ideas and very conservative values. Now that's going down the drain, and where's that going to get them? And mind you, this is just very recently too. When did we start enacting all these very socially liberal policies? What, in the 90s? So what, 30 years ago? It's
no, come on.
Oh, well, a little earlier than that.
It just gets worse every decade.
Yeah, exactly.
It was already bad in 1850, but or 1800 or 1750, but it just got worse.
It accelerates.
Exactly. Right. It's accelerating.
It was already bad in 1517.
Right. Yeah, that's where it started.
It was the damn apple.
William of Ockham too.
Oh, right. But my main point is, it's going to climax eventually. You're not going to have a stable society where people grow less and less virtuous. I think in the long run, you need an economy where people have virtue, have strong social conservative values. And if liberalism is trading wealth off, gaining wealth and trading that off, I think it is going to cost them. I think having a population that is low on virtue is too much of an externality.
Well, and so I think another way to respond to what Reaction is saying is that you're setting this up as like the Anglos versus the Russians, but if both societies are degenerate and one of them is just more efficient than the other, well, then what is the degeneracy is not necessarily playing a role, right? You can be. Is it possible to be efficient and not degenerate? I guess that would be the case where you would say that this whole thing is sort of impossible and there's nothing you can do about it. But I don't see how that's necessarily the case from that particular example.
Another example would be mid-19th century Britain versus China in the Opium Wars, where because they were farther along the route of techno-capitalist acceleration AI, they were able to completely trounce them. I agree that it's possible to be efficient without being degenerate. The problem is that these neoliberal societies where efficiency is absolutely optimized, the serious problem is that eventually, for some reason, things also get socially liberalized, and that might be because it's democracy, and it might just be because of just economic liberalism itself.
Yeah, but but at the same time, degeneracy is also optimized, and I think when you're doing that, you're basically running on fumes, or you're going to run on fumes eventually.
Yeah, yeah. So are we able to figure out about what actual system, like what's actually happening, like right now? Because the entire debate, I just never got a sense that anybody understood like how the system actually works right now. It's like I've learned probably like 5% of how the system works, and I'm past Dunning-Kruger at this point. It's just terrible.
I suppose one sort of question on that on that topic for Dr. Russell here is is what we live under capitalism now? Because I know many libertarians would take issue with this. They would say what we live under is definitely not capitalism.
Well, I know they would say that about free markets. They would say that we don't live under, we don't have free markets because there's there's too much what they would call intervention. Do we live under capitalism? I mean, I think so. I mean, heck, you listen to heck, even like Steve Bannon's going to call half the places that libertarians refer to as communist or socialist, he calls them state capitalism. I mean, at some point, these definitions, I don't even really, is there even
Sounds
any
like
point?
there's no definition here, and it's just magic words being thrown around.
Well, like I said, I think what happens is someone will say this is a capitalist economy, and then to prove that, they just list off a bunch of characteristics of the economy or policies that the government has, that the government implements in that country. And it's like, again, I don't really see. I mean, I guess maybe it's because my framing is so messed up relative to what's actually happening, and this is sort of like the realignment thing. Is I just see it all as liberal. Like when I was listening to the debate, there's these three parties that are supposed to be distinct, but all I kept hearing was two guys whose philosophy is liberal and atheistic versus a guy who isn't an economics guru, but at least has the proper moral framing. So do we live in a capitalist economy? I don't know. We live in a liberal one, that's for darn sure, and it's not good, and I don't like it. And I don't really care if you want to call it socialism or state capitalism or whatever. I'm going to call it liberal, and therefore it's bad.
Okay, yeah, I would agree with that. And I see in the comments, like,
I'd say one thing to butt in front of you, 21st.
Sorry,
that I would say is yeah, I don't know. I really think this is a libertarian redefinition of what capitalism is. Those who say that this isn't real capitalism, because if we just look at say Adam Smith, one of the most influential people in the the intellectual foundation of capitalism, like he certainly was nothing like an anarcho-capitalist. So if if he understood capitalism with a not insignificant amount of government intervention, then why do we have to understand, like, why does the ideal capitalism for us then have to be like anarcho-capitalism or something close to it?
Well, okay, so I mean, my problem is that I basically have to ignore what any progressives or Marxists say about what it is, because Fitz Imperial is correct. He did say capitalism as a term was created by Marx. LOL. Indeed, LOL. I would say probably Adam Smith. Like, that's the general definition that people would go by, is that relatively few interventions, but people are allowed to allocate capital wherever. But I mean, capitalism itself, probably, I would probably say that it's a free market in capital, as in you're able to invest it or put it anywhere, you're able to keep it all the time, and so that doesn't really exist. But what confuses me even more than that is that, I mean, capital itself. What do you mean, like monetary resources? That's a construction made by the state, and so that kind of muddies things a little bit, doesn't it?
So one of the videos that Distributivist made is Capitalism is Magic, where he went over how it's usually a magic word. And some socialists respond to him. I think it's the guy behind Zero Books. And when he tried to corner him on this, Zero Books' response in the video was, "Oh, capitalism is more like a resemblance term. There's no exact way of defining it, but it has this kind of resemblance to these certain features that you could pick out. It's like a game. Like when you use the word game, there's no like one definition. That word fits everything from rugby, football to solitaire, and yet these are two things that have fairly little, if anything, in common, and yet we use the word game for them. And the issue with using capitalism in that sort of way is that you can't just say all capitalism then is therefore bad or wrong, because usually when you deduce that something is wrong, you start off with one univocal definition that just means something. But it seems that socialists who want to use capitalism in this way are kind of giving up the ghost, because on the one hand, they want to say it's immoral, but on the other hand, they want to have such a fluid definition where they could always just shift the goalposts. And that's really one of the big issues with how socialists approach the topic. If they can, kind of get distributivism to resemble capitalism enough, they could just smash it as just another instance of capitalism. Whereas if it doesn't, they'll say, "Oh, it's just this weird, abstruse thing that I don't really have to deal with."
Yeah, and this is probably why you have to basically ignore the Marxists and the socialists. So he tries to do a video response to Dave about how it's not a magic word that's sticked onto everything. And then at the end, he admits, well, yeah, it's just a resemblance term meant to stick on everything. I mean, they're basically snakes in the grass. And yes, it's meant to be a vague panacea word. That's what it's meant to be, in the same way that equality or racism or just all these magic words, it's made that way because it's supposed to function in that manner. So yeah, just ignore them. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say. It's like,
yeah,
I know what to say. Donate to Settlers Lament. Subscribestar.com/Settlers Lament. Patreon.com/Settlers Lament. And I have a Teespring store too, also linked in the description. Nice. Or you can make a super chat, though I get to keep more of the money on Subscribestar or Patreon.
So if we consider capitalism as like a free market and capital, we're able to allocate it wherever you want. Would you say it goes under that? Is that what the current system is?
Probably not, because I mean, there's, I don't know. I mean, it's so difficult because it's true that, so the libertarians would say, this isn't capitalism because the government is so involved in all the transactions. And there's all these regulations and there's trade restrictions, and so we don't have free movement of capital. We don't have free movement of labor because we haven't completely obliterated all immigration rules. So it's going to be a goalpost shifting exercise, just like the socialists like to do with their own ideology, right? It's never been tried. It's that sort of thing.
Well, no, I don't think it's a goalpost shifting in the same way that the socialists are. I think it's just autism in that, oh yes, there's like no such thing. Basically, that's right. Literally impossible unless you go all the way in that way.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess the response that I would have is that, okay, maybe that's the case, but then how much is the government itself influenced by the people who can buy access, right? In other words, I guess if you want to be a Marxist about it, right? How much is the government influenced by capital? So it's sort of like whatever kind of frame game you want to play with it, and here's the funny thing, right? Is that the libertarians are some of the biggest groups studying this kind of thing under the guise of something called public choice. They love to they love to sort of apply the individualist rationalist choice model to governments and bureaucrats and try to understand their behavior in that sense. And so, in that way, they're kind of making the point that this sort of thing is inevitable, right? You're always going to have, the government sort of captured by some kind of corporate interest.
Okay,
so
well,
it's like, well, okay, so is that capitalism? Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on which part do you want to ignore.
Well, you kind of have to understand that they are special and they have a bit of a struggle here, and they're not going to make sense because the libertarians have a very reductive understanding of what the state is. If we understand it from the NRX perspective, the Mold-Bugging perspective, the state is really just a collection of all the people that collaborate with the people in power. So in this more understandable thing, the corporations that lobby and prop up the government either by supporting the woke ideology or by, doing favorable deals for them, they're basically an arm of the state, even though it's more like a tendril and it's farther away than that center in group. But so like Twitter's part of the state because they get rid of the dissidents that oppose the state on there. So they're never going to understand this from a government intervention perspective. But I'll say on the point of a free allocation of capital wherever. Well, if capital is basically defined by the monies that are put into the system itself, well, that kind of completely contradicts the current monetary system. The current monetary system isn't anywhere near free in that way because the state makes sure to monopolize it, and they make sure that they control the supply in a way where they actually intentionally increase it. They intentionally increase the money supply over time. And of course, that causes inflation because when you make more of something, when you increase the supply of something, all the supply of it, every single unit of it goes down.
Price falls,
yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm struggling to get that out. But so they do that in order to increase consumerism, and it allows for easier credit. People are able, if you're borrowing a loan at interest, the interest rate is going to be cut by the inflation rate. So credit gets easier to take out. So all these things have a big effect on the economy. And I wouldn't say that's free. That's has a very deleterious effect. By Bitcoin.
So sorry, 21st, you stunned me with your brilliance. So I don't know where are we at. I guess one other question that was sort of raised during the debate by the communist guy, socialist, whatever. He said that really distributism is just a type of socialism. What would you say about that?
Yeah, again, I think it's this misnomer of socialism as a set of policy tools versus socialism as an ideology, and you saw Mena trying to get around this, talking about well, because here's the funny thing, right? Here's the framing. Here's the background is that Trent Horn knows. Him and this professional economist wrote a book defending capitalism from the idea that socialism is condemned. Okay. And that's like the through line in his book. Socialism is condemned specifically many, 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 many times by the popes, and capitalism is just sort of slapped on the wrist. So therefore capitalism good. And then at the end of the book, he slapped on a very pathetic, in my opinion. I wrote a book review of this book, by the way. If you go to the Imaginative Conservative website, I wrote a book review of this. Anyway, so he slaps on this critique of distributism, which is just, to me, half-assed and ridiculous, and not serious in the sense that obviously the people who wrote it have never engaged with any of these perspectives. In other words, they haven't engaged with the perspective of putting the church's teaching first, not putting liberal ideology first. Okay, I don't care if it's distributed. Maybe you don't like Chesterton. Fine. Okay, whatever you want to call it. It's not. It's we're just going to call it distributism. We're going to call it solidarism. Fine, whatever. So then Mena, on the other hand, he's saying, oh, socialism is this rich, vibrant array of all these different possible things. And of course, I don't like Pol Pot or Mao or Stalin. Those guys are bad, but distributism, or excuse me, but socialism's good. It's just, the popes, they said that, all these other things about socialism are bad, but not my socialism. And so it's an interesting case you have here where he's trying to redefine it. And obviously if you read the popes, if you read what they say about socialism, it's not the idea that they're just condemning the materialism of the socialists or the atheism of the socialists or any of that. They condemn, I guess the central component of the socialist ideology, which is the idea that property ownership is bad and that people shouldn't be able to own things. So that's still in Mena's philosophy. He just won't admit it. And so again, the stark contrast between distributism and these other two things is that the ideology, the morality comes from the church, the philosophy comes from the church, and the policies are just simply incidental instruments. They can be good or bad. They can be implemented correctly or incorrectly. Sometimes the effects they have are not efficient or optimal from a liberal perspective. Sometimes they might have, as 21st Reaction has pointed out, sometimes they might decrease your international power. But in every case, the church gives secular authorities leeway. I mean, things like immigration. The Catechism says, well, you don't have to have completely open borders, but you should also care about other people. And Pope Francis has said, if you've got people coming into your country and obliterating your culture, you should stop letting them in. So it's one of these things where there is, I think, in a legitimate solidarist perspective, there is a lot of leeway. I did an episode of my show on Chancellor Dollfuss's constitution for Austria, which was an explicit attempt to make Catholic social teaching the fundamental starting point of their constitution. And so, that's possible to do. But then, of course, Mena and Horn are both going to call you the F word, right? The second you pop this stuff out.
I'd become a distributist if they just were able to set up and arrange the family formation and just assign a wife. That would be nice. But
it's more about you than about distributism.
Excuse me, I don't want a state mandated girlfriend. I want a state mandated wife assigned by your local FSSP priest. But to be more serious, I mean, honestly, I think it'll save you a lot of brain power, Mr. Russell, if you just do not take these left-wingers and their ideology at face value. Because when you're talking about, Jose Mana, I forget what his name is, but basically the socialists, it's just like every other, realm of left-wing thought, gender studies, feminism, critical race theory, and socialism. What they do is they have a wonderful, sophisticated constellation of different little schools of thought, and you have to attack all of them or else you're wrong. So you're never able to critique it. But in the end, when they have some kind of crucial movement to support, they all come together like just automatically. So it's like for the outsider, you have to criticize everything or else you're wrong. And then for the in-group, they all coordinate in order to do certain political objectives. So yeah, you can't really take it at face value. Also, yeah. Shoot, I forget what else you were saying because I was too distracted by the bebe.
Sorry guys. It's bedtime for them, so they're a little reluctant.
But
Oh, I do remember actually. So ownership. Why exactly should ownership be distributed? This is why I thought it was just kind of some arbitrary ideal. Because when I think in my head, the nature of the human pyramid, the reality of the human pyramid, and there's that 0.1% of people, the galaxy brain, that can manage an entire region's resources and allocate them efficiently, and then most people wouldn't own stuff. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, so it comes down to the it comes down to the requirement of justice with regard to wages. So the idea is that the popes recognize the presence of sort of power in economic interactions, and so if let's say you are considering hiring me, right, and you have a large industrial type facility or something like this, right, and of course we know here in the New World we have a lot of little towns built around facilities like that, right? So the idea is that if I own something that at least can contribute to the material well-being of my family, right? Something that I own, and I'm not completely dependent upon wages, then it puts me in a better bargaining position with respect to you, the employer, right? So then when I'm coming to you, I'm not coming to you with an all or nothing, I either take whatever you're willing to give me or starve. I'm in a different position where I can say, I don't really like what you're offering me. So, I have the wherewithal. I have my own, I have my own home. I have, the means of securing a subsistence living for a period of time until I am able to, find a deal or force you into giving me a good deal. And again, this is, so the response can be, oh, well, that's why we have unemployment. That's why we have charity, blah, 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 blah. Well, again, part of human dignity is work for the resources that you use. This is the telos of being a husband and a father, right? You provide for your family through your own toil. Right. And so there's something about that then the economic system that is built up around that is supposed to fall into line with that teleology.
Okay, so and then the next question is, what really is the nature of ownership? Because it seems like human rights, individual rights, we're stuck in this locking conception of like ownership, like ownership when it's really meant isn't supposed to be absolute, is it? I mean, we don't even own anything. We're not even entitled to anything, because it's like, God created everything, and everything that we have, we were just basically given.
everything upon the face of the earth belongeth to the Lord, somewhere in the Bible.
So you don't own nothing. You just manage it. You are an asset manager.
So ownership is kind of divided into two properties. One is possession, and the other is of course the right to do with your possession. So there's like a normative quality and a descriptive quality. So if I have an apple in my hand, I possess it, but does that mean I have a right to eat it? Well, if I'm still at the store and I haven't purchased it yet, then I don't, unless I plan on buying it. The normative qualities where people kind of where we have like a theoretical dispute, because at what point is it mine to do with as I please and as I have the right to? I think descriptive stuff is pretty self-evident. In terms of who has the right to do it, it is, are you the person, do you possess it by means of your own labor, or did you acquire it in a rightful way? Or is it something that you now possess rightfully because you, being somebody who requires it for sustenance of life, have no other means but to rely on it for that very end? It's in the last one where someone like St. Thomas Aquinas would say, yeah, you're normally not allowed to I don't know, break into somebody's property and use it. However, if you're stuck in the woods and you just see a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and the only alternative is you're going to die, then yeah, you would have a right to just break in, keep yourself warm, and then afterwards maybe try your best to provide reparations to the owner. But at that point, you would have, at the very least for some modicum of time, rightful possession. So its ownership requires both the descriptive and the normative aspect of possession. It's at that point where you could say you own it and you have divine permission to manage it.
And to tack onto that, if you read something about the medieval understanding of property and economics and these sorts of things, the medieval philosophers said that if we're in a sense, if we're in the Garden of Eden, then we have no need of property. But property is sort of this concept that we have to have because of the fallen state of the world that we live in. And so it's basically a set of rules that allows us to live. And then if you go to fast forward, very, very close to now relative to the Middle Ages, Pope St. John Paul II has a famous phrase, term that he uses in, I believe it's Solicitudo Rei Socialis, one of his three big CST encyclicals. He says that property is under what he calls the social mortgage. And so this is his way of tying together the concept of ownership by the individual or by the family with the idea of the universal destination of goods. And so, St. John Chrysostom tells us, whatever we own in excess belongs to the poor, right? So that it's not, so helping others who are destitute to live is not it's not an act of kindness. It's an act of, it's ensuring justice.
Oh, yes. I completely agree with that. It's just a nice thing that you don't necessarily have to help them by just giving them money, because some people don't do well when you do that, especially in the modern age. The poor are not as they're poor. They're not poor like they used to be. If you get what I'm saying, they used to be a little more righteously poor, and then there's people now that just can't handle resources well. So with those people, if you really want to help them, then you could become their feudal lord, and that would probably be a very good and meaningful patron-client relationship. This is why I was wondering, should ownership really be distributed and everyone has their own 3 acres, when the natural patron-client relationship that has existed basically forever and ends up getting repeated by socialists and by whoever, even in the modern age? Should we really get rid of that?
Well, I mean, in feudalism, there was actually, it's not, I mean, property relations were not like how we understand it today, but there was a general understanding in feudalism that people had a right to the land that they worked on, and like that they had worked on for generations. So it they didn't really outright own it. But you couldn't just deprive someone of the property that they were working on, and that wasn't really changed until capitalism came about and the enclosure movement and stuff.
Oh, I see. Yeah, the enclosure movement was really bad. It was a neoliberal movement, unfortunately. I guess that's how it's been working for a while.
But I mean, I'd say in a feudal sense, it comparing to sort of how it is today, serfs did kind of have a certain type of ownership over their land.
Right, but now we have the problem of is that people have access to ownership of things that aren't viscerally right in front of them, like the land that you're working on. Owning basically, and having a right to the thing that you're working with right in front of you is great and works great for the simple as folks and for the majority of the population. But in this crazy atomized internet age where you have access to you have access to stocks which are just like pixels on a screen, or you have access to gold that's held in a storage unit somewhere like 1,000 miles away. I don't think the majority of people can really handle that in a prudent manner. I just don't think that's part of the nature of the majority of people.
Yeah, so maybe the ideal would be to get rid of those things and make everything a little more real, right? I mean, that would be one way of dealing with what you're saying.
Well, I mean, it is real. I mean, the gold is actually physically there.
Sure.
It's just that
I guess
there's
make
only
it
a
more
very small
present to
subset.
you.
Sorry.
I guess what I mean is like make it more perceptible. Like I have this idea that like back when we actually had even when we had just even when a normal transaction was cash and paper money and coins, I have this idea that people were more frugal because they had like a tangible sense, like when I give someone a $5 bill, well, there's less money in my wallet. Whereas now, since everything's just, it's all digital and I just have a card and I swipe it, and whatever, it's like that. Yeah. I don't know. It's like there's the connection in your head is gone to like the physical reality of it.
So at one point in my life, I actually did work for an adult learning center, and part of what we did was we took adults who were having financial difficulties and we gave them lessons on financial responsibility. One of the tips we actually gave them was when you go into a store, do not take a credit card, do not even take your debit card, have a budget, know what you're going in to buy, and carry cash. And it was precisely because of that, whereby adults were actually able to think, I'm not going to make any last second changes or alterations in my budget or in my shopping list. I know how much money I have, and it gives you this real tangible sense of what you're losing and what you're gaining. Whereas with a credit card, you kind of lose out on that.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's very based, and maybe hopefully I'll be able to do that in the future, because man, when I started learning a bit about economics, it's literally like, so the political sphere is like when you learn the relevant facts, it's a giant red pill. And then learning economics and how so few people on the same level of people have, a very low understanding of that too. It's another red pill of like how things actually work. But if the problem is that all of these trends are going in the opposite direction. We're going to a cashless society. We're going to a more abstract society, a digital society. And I mean, I don't like all that. I mean, I prefer the revolt against the modern world idea, but that's where it's going. And only a small subset of the population are able to think about capital and managing stuff in this abstract way. Like, I mean, if you were trying to tell someone to like buy Bitcoin's a digital asset, and you have a right to it by like a line of letters and numbers on a piece of paper, that's just completely foreign to the regular person, and only a subset of the population understand why that would be useful and valuable to them.
So then what's the conclusion you're drawing from those that string of facts?
Well, I mean, the problem is I don't like those trends, but if it's going in that direction and I can't stop it, then I wouldn't. Then if most things are owned in that abstract way, then I don't think the regular person is capable of managing it in a reasonable way. So it's like all the things that a regular person would own would have to be like the things that are viscerally direct in front of them, like a house and stuff.
Right.
But there's this class of like autist galaxy brains that like manage all this stuff in the cloud.
Yeah, so I would say that if this is trying to deal with the issue of the just distribution of property and stuff like this, I mean, I would say that we do have mechanisms for people to own things, to own some kind of productive capacity that is not illegitimate or evil in and of itself, while also dealing with their insufficient capacity to understand the intricacies of those assets. So, I mean, this is why we have 401ks, right? you just sign up for a certain percentage of your salary to go tax free, or maybe not if you have a different kind of arrangement, into an investment vehicle. And then all of the investments are made for you, and you just have a little piece of it taken, a little piece of the return taken out as a fee. And you are sort of forced to save, right? I mean, this gets into the whole behavioral economics and setting the right default and all of that kind of things. Paternalistic, bad kind of thing. And maybe your employer gives you a match. Or maybe you have a right to a pension, right? Maybe there's a pension investment that you have, and your service in the company entitles you to a certain percentage of your salary after you leave. So that can be construed as an asset, as something you own. Sort of the paper that entitles you to those payments in the future, right? And it's an annuity, which is totally legitimate in the eyes of sort of the medieval economists and the church at the time. When it comes to so that's earning, being able to have capital income so that you can buy food and things like that for yourself and your family. You also have on the hand of, or in the case of things like a house and stuff like that, and land or whatever sufficient to house your family. I mean, one of the small, but I guess maybe in realistically large changes that we could make is sort of bringing back the notion of the multi-generational household. And we have in our time tremendous space, tremendous square footage per person in a house. And so this is the sense in which, like you were saying, the poor aren't really poor. The average amount of space that a person has in a home is absurdly large compared to what it used to be, even just like 30 years ago. And so, and we're sort of seeing some of the challenges that we're all facing right now, pushing us towards that, right? With the whole pandemic thing. And, you've got the NEETs and, people living in their mom's basement or whatever. And it's like, is this all bad? I don't know. It doesn't really bother me too much. And I mean, not, my children aren't that old, but I mean, if my kid is 25 and wants to live in my house, I mean, it's my child. What else, what kind of an answer would I have? I mean, if that's
that's something I've said before. Destroy the nuclear family. Make the what's the term for it? The intergenerational family or whatever.
Extended.
I don't want to destroy the nuclear family. I want to add to it.
No, I know it's just
So yeah, I mean, I just you just want to kick these lefties in the balls, but
you don't get kids these days, Russells. We're irony bros, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm only 30.
That is actually a serious problem. So. It's like I can't say anything without filtering it through 5 degrees of irony.
Yeah, right. No, I love all the Zoomers. You're wonderful people, but so I think that's one thing, and the ownership of a house. I mean, good grief! Let's talk about a policy where we can just get rid of usury, and we don't have to really sacrifice hardly anything. I mean, we can still allocate capital goods perfectly well in an all equity based economy, and then we don't have to put people under the burden of debt. Right? So the debt just wouldn't be available to them because we just simply wouldn't have things like credit cards and stuff. And okay, the transition might be tough or whatever, but just make me the dictator and I'll figure it out. So I mean, it's these are things that need to be done, right? I mean, you get rid of usury and we solve a lot of these problems. Stop.
Okay, but not you. I'm going to be the king, not you.
Okay, well, I mean, I trust you well enough, but not Settler's Lament because he's Canadian.
Well, so am I.
I know. I was sparing you.
I honored myself, eh?
We got another super chat question. For £5, does distributism reallocate wealth by the use or threat of force? Is it voluntary? If not, how is it not a violation of individual rights?
Well, he thinks individuals have rights.
I love that this is Lumberg saying this to us. I mean, it makes a lot of sense if you've ever seen Office Space.
Yes.
But That's kind of an old reference, you know. I mean, look, if I'm going to answer this, I'm going to say, does it reallocate wealth by the use or threat of force? Well, I don't know. Do you think that governments enacting policy is inherently the use of force?
Them inflating
Yeah,
the money
I mean
supply
that's
force
obviously
me.
the definition he's using.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
okay, well then in that case,
my
yeah.
answer to this is stop being cringe.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe it doesn't require a specific answer, but I mean, look, you know, individual rights, okay, but you know, the family is the fundamental unit of society, and so that's what we're concerned about. And if someone is, you know, the state has an interest in promoting the family. And so if someone is, by their own actions, getting in the way of that by having property in excess or something like this, you know, in other words, in the sense of like, you know, okay, yeah, you know, Reaction thinks everybody's too dumb to handle Bitcoin or whatever, but they're at least smart enough to, like, you know, repair a house or you know, manage a property, right? So I mean, if they're smart enough to be able to do that, then, you know, maybe we do need to make sure that you know, people have their own homes and they're not just you know, under the thumb of some guy in Boston who owns all of the houses. Hey, there's a good one. Settlers.
To be fair, I'm smart enough to deal with Bitcoin and too dumb to deal with repairing a house, and then they're the inverse of that.
Yeah. So specialization is for insects, right?
Right. Also, another thing to add, I think there's also this very mistaken concept of quote unquote individual rights, where we see rights stemming from an atomized person rather than seeing man as a social animal who has to live within a greater society. Yes, we all live in a society. And in light of that, there are certain social ends that everyone is obliged to maintain in order to actually have a place where everybody can live a stable life, accrue wealth, and not degenerate into atomized individuals.
I think one suggestion for our friend with the £5 donation is to read a book called The Virtue of Nationalism, and I'm recommending this not for the stuff on nationalism itself, and I to some extent I don't really like a lot of the things the author says in this book because he's very anti-Catholic. And he has a real problem with the Holy Roman Empire, which was obviously holy and therefore based. But he does a good job at the beginning of the book helping the right liberal person who at least nominally has a commitment to their family and loves the idea of you know, safety and security in a family structure. He does a good job of explaining that, you know, we have duties to our family and thus to our communities. Our communities are nothing but an extension of our family. A community is a group of families. So it's, you know, he does a good job explaining that. And some of the stuff he says about nationalism is good, and some of it's just cringe and liberal. But I think that was something that really helped me a few years ago when I read it, to like kind of snap out of this whole obsession with, you know, I want to do what I want to do. Well, okay, fine. But what about your family? What about your parents? I mean, this is a commandment, right? Come on, honor your father and mother, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, my answer to this question, I know it's a very common question from libertarians, and, you know, I'm sorry, I know I called you cringe. You know, I love all my donors, all my viewers, even. I'm sorry, you're not cringe. But I mean, my answer to this is just absolutely rejecting this framing. I just fundamentally do not believe that individuals have an absolute right to not be compelled to do things by anyone ever. I just do not believe that is I just do not believe that's a true statement. So the statements like that, they just rely on they rely on the on the libertarian premise. They rely that you assume it's true, and I don't assume it's true, and that's why I posted this quote from Romans 13. For those of you who are unaware, I've cited this many times on this channel, the Romans 13, but it's a very famous Bible passage discussing the duty of someone with the governing authorities. And it says that you have a moral duty to obey what the governing authorities do. And I saw someone in chat say, like, surely that refers to godly authorities, right? Nope. It literally was talking about the Roman Empire, the same empire that crucified Christ, and it still said you have a moral duty to obey what the government does. Generally, now of course, most Christians, the Catholic Church included, would say that does not include immoral actions. But there's hardly any evidence in the Bible that immoral actions includes taxation or redistribute or distributing property properly. So I mean that's my basic answer to it. You have a duty to obey what the government does, and the government can do a moral thing sometimes, and if they're doing an immoral thing, then you all have a duty to resist that thing. But immoral things are not the government instituting economic policies you don't like.
And I saw somebody saying, let's see, yes, duty to family, friends, and community, not to some random out a population of multiple millions. Look, if see, this is I think a part of this atomization thing. Just because yes, you have a duty to your family, and I'm glad we agree, and to your community. Well, your community is in some sense narrow. Is it Dunbar's number is like 100 or 150, something like that? But also in another sense, your community is much larger than this. I mean, you have a nation. That's what nations are. And so to the extent that your actions make it difficult for someone else to fulfill the commitments that they have and that they should have to their parents, and to their families and to their communities, to the extent that you hamper them from that, well, then you are a force for evil, right? This is it's all tied together. So your actions, no matter how secret you think they are, or your own personal views or whatever, certainly have an impact on other people.
Wow, the temporal world in economics is such a mess and hurts my head. Maybe we should just be poor and return to monk in the woods, and then just die and go to heaven.
Just for the person saying, except when your tax collector is the Israeli Revenue Service. Now, I'm not going to say whether. Now, first off, I'm not going to say whether or not America and Israel's alliance is a well-advised one. I think everyone has their own opinion on that, and I'm not going to touch that one. But I will say this: I think there is even room to say that sometimes, from a military perspective, even you have a bit of a duty to back up your ally, and they have one to back you up. Now, maybe that is not an alliance that you should be having in the first place. And between the US and Israel, that is a very live discussion. But my point is, in principle, I think you should recognize that sometimes even military alliances require one state helping out another, so long as that state is willing to help you right back.
Well, I think, again, Romans 13 is just, it couldn't be any clearer on this topic, because this is always how it will go. I'll cite that chapter, and then people say, yeah, but the government, they're funding abortion, they're doing this X, Y, Z thing that I don't like. And yeah, modern governments are doing many bad things. And if the United States government, if say you're a nurse or a doctor, and they're instructing you to collaborate with committing an abortion or something like that, then you should absolutely refuse to do that, and you shouldn't do that under any circumstances. But the reason Romans 13 is so clear is, again, that this is the same empire that crucified Christ. This was an empire that was doing many, many immoral things at this time. And St. Paul said to the Romans, to the Christians in the city of Rome, not to resist the governing authorities, that even the empire that crucified Christ himself even that empire, you still have a duty to obey. So if that's the case, then I can't imagine that that's any less true for America today, despite all the many bad things that are being done.
And to respond to that point, it's robbery, or quote unquote taxation is theft. Something you have to realize, theft requires not only taking into possession something which was not in your possession, but doing so unjustly. So the person from whom you stole money, they had a right to that money. Now, if you're saying that the government has no right to take your possession, well, to simply say taxation is theft is begging the question. In order for it to be theft, you have to demonstrate why it is that you have an absolute right to your tax dollars that in principle the government could not take from you and could not repossess. And that's something that requires you to say more than taxation is theft.
I mean, protection of property itself doesn't really exist outside of the state, except for maybe if you had a security force for it.
Exactly, and that's another thing. There's also a claim about figuring out who did have a right to some property, and that requires a legal code, that requires a police force, that requires an arbiter of some kind, and you don't have an institution which can preserve that, then the term theft becomes meaningless in any practical usage.
Okay. And got another $5 donation. What about Georgist economics subverts rent seeking and capital accumulation while freeing land from speculation while providing a pro-social tax base?
Wasn't Adam Smith by that kind of reasoning also a Georgist? Because from what I recall, he thought land ownership was very similar to a kind of theft because they didn't contribute any value to it.
I have no idea. I mean, I've heard of Georgism, but I don't really know any details on how it actually operates.
I don't know a ton about it, but I do know that sort of the basis of it is massive land taxation. So to the point that that's like the primary means of funding the government or whatever. At least as far as I know. I could be totally wrong about that. Hopefully the comments will correct me. But it's I think it's the case that if that it would be a very smart policy to give everyone a relatively light property tax burden on the home they live in, and we have this distinction in currently. I don't know if any of you all have mortgages, but here in the U.S., there certainly is a distinction between the property you own and occupy and living, houses or apartment complexes or whatever that you own that you don't occupy. And so what I would say in my very limited knowledge of the Georgist perspective is that the speculation with respect to home prices and the absurd luxuriousness of so many houses today, and the pure evil of the landlord expropriating from the renter. And if you think that makes me a commie, please go to the Leonine Institute and check out our stuff over there. I'm not 100% certain we have something on that right now, but I think we do, or at least it's coming. We wouldn't have the problems that we have with respect to renting, where essentially the person who's renting pays the full cost, the full price of the ownership of the home, and yet they don't own it. I think this is just ridiculous. So it's analogous to like if I go to Settler's house and I ask him for a hammer, and then when I go back and return it, he says, okay, yeah, give me the whole, also pay the full price of a hammer, even though you just borrowed it. And that was it. I mean, it's ridiculous. We wouldn't have these problems if we had a two-tiered property tax system. relatively low mill rate for your own property that you live in, and then maybe 10 or 15 times that for property that you hold and use as income.
I love thinking about, the specific policies that I would enact in order to social engineer a society of millions of people. It does tittle my imagination a lot of the time. Someone commented, use sales tax to fund the government, not property tax. And I would, although, I might use both, I would definitely agree with the sales tax, because sales tax is great disincentive for meaningless consumption of stuff. So that's good for disincentivizing the plebs to consume stuff that's lame. Also, a deflationary money system would also encourage them to save instead of endlessly spend and consume. So that would fight consumer culture too.
But you have to be careful. You really have to be careful with sales taxes, because sales taxes are massively regressive if they're just applied across the board. To all goods.
I know, that's fantastic.
So you're fine with funding the government with sales taxes so that poor people can't buy food.
Oh no! Oh come on! They wouldn't have to not be able to buy food. Perhaps I would just do luxury taxes on all of the frivolous items that I deem unnecessary.
Yeah, sure.
As you distributists and you socialists would say.
I love it.
But,
yeah.
But then again, we could always use more sin taxes.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, more taxes on electric vehicles. How about some of those?
Oh yeah, how about this? 900% tax on all pornography.
No, come on,
it should be illegal.
No, I'm kidding.
But yeah. So thank you very much to Jared Roberts for that.
But seriously, ban all pornography.
Yes.
I feel like we say that every single stream.
Yeah, but what's the point? Yeah,
idea.
but to be fair, this is my second stream, so I should at least get to say it once.
He's right.
Okay, so Levi, what? Sorry, I meant Levy. What food quotas and what specific food groups are we supposed to allow that are deemed good and necessary to provide for everyone?
Well, Trent Horn. Oh, sorry. Who am I talking to again?
Reaction. Look, I am the reaction.
Look, hey, sales taxes. I mean, look, there are so many better options. If you like this idea of limiting the cooming and the luxury, just put massive tariffs on everything. That's helpful, right? Look, the U.S. has 300 million people in it, right? We have all this land. Kazakhstan is the same kind of thing, right? You guys have fewer people, but more land, right? Not as much arable land. Maybe,
I think you're pretending to be worried about people not having enough food if there was an egregious sales tax. I mean, have you seen how fat they are?
Well, no, I understand. Yeah. No, I totally get that. But I'm just saying, in principle, it's a regressive tax. And so, like, if you're going, do you even know how much you would have to increase sales taxes to fund the current spending of the United States government? If all you had was property taxes and sales taxes?
And
you just seize the endowments of all those communist universities.
Well, another point though is
this is complicated.
Although, from what I understand, isn't a lot of the reason why people are obese because of the fact that there are huge subsidies on corn, which then go on to make sweeteners like fructose, and then just
sugar
and sugar, and then just go on to fatten people up. Like, it seems that rather than have something like a sugar tax after the fact, you could just, I don't know, stop subsidizing that stuff from the get-go.
Yeah, this is the whole problem, and you get right to it, Fisher. What we're doing is, because nobody wants to get to the fundamentals of how the system works and what's wrong, they're just pasting band-aids on top of band-aids on top of band-aids, solving the problem that you created by the last solution with a new solution that creates a new problem, and so on and so on. So all these supposedly like distributists or socialists or whoever you want to say that is like, I don't like this problem. I don't like that insulin's super expensive. Well, if you come back to me and tell me exactly why you think that situation was caused, then I'll take what you're saying seriously.
Yeah. So that's you come back to the that famous graph by one of the guys at AEI, and he's showing that, like, in his framing, and I guess this is 21st Reaction's framing, that, you know, the prices of so many goods over time are falling, and yet there's like a handful of goods that are rising in price. And of course, the AEI explanation is government, made the prices of all these other things go up through subsidies and stuff like that, but not the prices of all these other things.
I mean, you could say, I guess, like, if we could say, like, mass immigration is the government policy, perhaps that would cause an increase in housing prices. But I just think that's a...
Well, I mean, I think the argument is that there's a massive subsidy on the interest rate for mortgages and mortgage, the lending standards and stuff are all messed with and everything like that. And that creates a boom in house prices and stuff like that.
And so, they also partially cartelize the insurance industry by requiring people to purchase insurance,
sure,
which literally goes against the basic premise of free purchased insurance.
So, here's the thing. Here's my general response to what you're saying right now. So earlier we made a joke about someone saying that, for the government to do something is socialist, and then if the government does more, it's more socialist or whatever, right? Well, so I mean, here's the thing, is that even if you're going to shoehorn me into distributism, fine, okay, I'll take that term for now. Distributists don't just say, give me more regulations. Of course, we are smart enough, some of us, to identify the wrong-headed policies that should be reversed or deleted or modified or whatever. But sometimes, so I mean, personally, I would say that the reason why, you mentioned insulin, why is this stuff such a problem for us? Well, first of all, it's because we murdered mutual aid societies essentially by the 1940s, and we completely killed them by the 60s. We have employment taxes that have artificially pumped up the health insurance markets, and those companies basically today exist because of the tax incentives for non-cash payment. So yeah, is there a confluence of bad policies that are that we should get rid of? Okay, fine. Yeah, I agree with that. But that doesn't mean that you can't have other policies that help things. And I'm not saying you don't. I'm not saying you're disagreeing with me on that. I'm just saying regressive taxes are real, and we want to be mindful of that. And I, as someone who used to operate in agriculture a lot as a scholar, I would agree that there's a lot of distortion in those markets that probably does cause distortions in dietary practices and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think in general, there's just there's so much wealth in general, and there's so much of our welfare policies are built around food. I mean, we have SNAP here in the U.S. Maybe you call it food stamps. We have WIC, Women, Infants, and Children. And so even those who are poor certainly have very good access to food, to the extent that we have had to kind of redefine food justice. Poverty. And now we have this idea of a food desert, which I have never understood. And even when I've looked into it, I'm like, this is just ridiculous. But the whole idea is that people don't have access to like good food. Like they live close to a bunch of gas stations and McDonald's, but they don't. But the grocery stores too far away. And
this is your good and dignified and necessary whatever is necessary for human dignity and stuff, man. It's going to be subject to this myth of progress, and that line is going to be raised higher and higher as we go through the techno-capitalist acceleration towards insanity. And by the way, I am definitely for regulations. I'm definitely for regulating the food intake of most people. There's way too much McDonald's in there.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little too far into the kind of well, I mean, we need to understand the concept of subsidiarity, right? I mean, this is the problem with all of the liberals, whether they're capitalists or socialists. They think they understand subsidiarity, and they don't. The capitalists think that the 9th and 10th Amendments are subsidiarity, and that George Washington was a Catholic or something like that. And the socialists think that whatever the Politburo decides to allow lower levels of government to handle is subsidiarity, which is totally ridiculous too. The idea of subsidiarity is that decisions should be made by the smallest or most local political unit that is appropriate for those things, and that the highest levels should foster cooperation amongst those different levels and ensure that the lower levels are not put upon by sort of the middle level. And again, I refer to my episode on Chancellor Adolphus's Constitution for an example of at least an attempt at this. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but we'll never know because the freaking Nazis killed him. So anyway, this is an example of a concept that is just not understood by the liberal types. And so I know you're kidding about, sending your minions to make sure that people aren't eating too much food. But again, well, I mean, maybe you're not, but the point is that that's a violation of subsidiarity, and really makes you sound like a socialist in my mind. So,
well, okay. I just want to say, when you're looking at all these groups, please do not assume it's all good faith, and please do not assume that it's beliefs in the same way that you have beliefs. Sure. Because what the mechanism is and what ideas are selected in the current system is based on how much power can be expressed and extracted from those ideas. So one of their tricks that they have in their toolkit is to have, hey, we have a problem. They actually foment and create a problem, and then they sell the solution to that, which they create another problem out of, and then they use that to exercise more power to have a solution to it. Then this is one of their strategies to do it. So when we just point out a surface level problem and give them more power to solve it, it's playing into their game.
Yeah.
Seize the means of reproduction.
I already have, so I'm good.
Go for it.
I was just going to say, is there anything else, or is that it for today, or like what?
I was just going to throw in there that you know what? Never mind. Just go for it. I'm good.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, remember to subscribe to everyone here. Everyone here has their own stuff. So make sure to check that out. It's in the description below. I'll be hanging around Discord right after now. So if anyone wants to chat, head over to my Discord server. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching us. Does anyone have anything specific they got to say?
I just want to plug my show, of course, which the links are kindly provided in the description. But I also want to plug the Leonine Institute's second issue of our magazine just came out yesterday, and so I just put that link in the chat on YouTube. And so if you want to, we were just talking about subsidiarity, and if you want to learn kind of the other major pillar of, I'm going to say Catholic, social teaching, but just a really good version, I think, of just kind of a right-wing, family-focused, community-focused perspective on the political and economic world. Check out our latest issue. It's on solidarity. The previous issue is on subsidiarity. So I think maybe a little bit arrogant to say or whatever, but I think there's some great content in there for folks to get kind of a basic grasp on this stuff.
Okay, yeah, cool. John, did you have something you want to say?
Sure. Right now I am. Right now I have a YouTube channel, John Fisher 2.0. You could subscribe to it. It's in the description of this video. Feel free to follow me on social media, including Twitter, now on Gab. And if you're looking to follow me, and you don't really have enough time for all these long drawn-out videos, I also have a blog on Medium, which you could also find through my channel.
Yes, and of course, follow me in my channel. I am The Reaction. I'll be making a video soon about probably making some predictions about the coming decades, some historical developments. But yeah, I mean, to wrap it up, revolt against the world, revolt against the modern world, and buy Bitcoin.
Okay, yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us. Bye.